Guys, the attendance is on, so in case you have not put it till now, please put it. Okay, so I think the attendance is not really moving at the pace I was expecting. So maybe we can start. By the way, there is some issue with my broadband connection today. So if 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 my voice breaks or if I go away for a moment, don't be worried. I have a backup connection, so I'll just connect to it and then come back online. Okay, but yeah, if there is like an abrupt disconnection, just uh, just know that I'll reconnect soon from a different connection. Okay, so let's start. Hmm, what is happening? Yeah, this is what. Okay, so let me also keep checking my connection. Okay, so the first thing that we started off with was the idea that in this course we are going to build systems, right? This was the overall idea of this course, and we wanted to learn the skills that were specifically meant for building systems. This is what we were attempting to do. So in that scenario, one of the skills that you would probably need to know, not just with respect to C++, but with respect to pretty much any language that you use, is exception handling. Okay, so what exactly is the idea of exception handling? To understand this, let us take an example, a real world example. So what if I ask you to write a user manual for a toy? Okay, how would you go about it? So one way to look at a user manual is that usually user manuals come up with two pieces of information, right? One is that how do you actually operate that particular equipment or that particular product for which this particular manual is being written, or the other way in which the other type of information that you would like to include in the user manual is the troubleshooting things, right? So basically you would like to tell me that if this product is not working as expected, these are some of the things that you can check. So let us say in case of a toy, you would like to see whether the batteries that you have installed, considering that it is a battery operated toy, you would like to see if the batteries are put in place correctly, whether the batteries are currently in discharged or they are still usable. So these are some of the things that people try out when it comes to troubleshooting. But overall the idea is that a user manual should discuss two different modes of operation, right? The normal mode of operation, how do you use the product or the service in the normal mode, and what should you do if something goes wrong, right? I mean, you may not be able to cover all possibilities, but you certainly try to cover as many as possible, right? At least the common ones are covered in the user manual, under the troubleshooting section. So now if I ask you to make a user manual for some toy, there are two ways to write this stuff, right? The first is that you basically separate the normal operation from the troubleshooting part, and this is the usual way in which user manuals are prepared. Or you can actually put troubleshooting points very next to the normal operation points, right? So I have seen some user manuals being written like this as well, but usually I have seen more user manuals corresponding to this particular format. So what I really want to say is something like this, that you have some steps in the normal operation of that particular toy or that particular product. So you specify it like this: step 1, step 2, step 3, so on and so forth. And then you have a troubleshooting section. So you have a normal operation section and you have a troubleshooting section in your user manual. And in the troubleshooting section you talk about scenarios, that if the toy, for example, is not getting switched on, then do this, check the batteries, see if the connections are correct, so on and so forth, right? So this is the troubleshooting part. So this is one way to write the user manual. The other way is, let us say, at step 2 you say switch on the toy, right? So here itself you put a troubleshooting scenario: if the toy is not getting switched on, check the batteries, check the connections, so on and so forth, right? Similarly, you say something else here, and then these are the troubleshooting scenarios associated with this step. So this is like two ways of creating a particular user manual, right? And what do you think would be a better option? That is the question in this particular lecture. So usually, for a person like me, I would prefer the first option, because when in most cases, right, in most cases when I'm reading the user manual, the product or the service is probably fine, right? I mean, I've just picked up the user manual to understand how it works, so it should, in most cases, work properly. And so I would just like to read the normal operations, and then step by step I'll be able to figure out how it works. Sometimes when I'm picking up the user manual to check a problem, then too it is actually better to have a troubleshooting section. I simply go to the troubleshooting section and I check what are the possibilities that I can check, right? So even from that perspective, having a different troubleshooting section makes much more sense. So if you try to abstract this idea, what exactly goes on when you prepare a typical user manual, what exactly goes on is that you actually segregate the core logic, the core operational points of that particular product or service from the error handling part, right? So error handling is essentially the part where something exceptional happens. So this is the idea, that ideally, whenever we build a system, whenever we do something like, let us say, writing a manual, we should try to segregate the core operational part from the troubleshooting part. So now, in order to do so in C++, there are three keywords which you need to know. Okay, these are try, catch, and throw. Okay, and how do you use it? So this is something like this. You create a block. So you understand what a block is? A block is just a paired parenthesis, right? So you put whatever code you put within paired parenthesis becomes a code block. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a try block. Okay, so this block, it is preceded by the keyword try. So you create a try block, and any piece of code which might have some kind of a problem, where you already know that there could be an exception when this piece of code executes, you put that piece of code inside a try block. And then right after the try block, you write one or more catch blocks. Okay, one or more, there can be more than one as well. And what you do is, in each catch block, you try to handle one particular scenario which may go wrong in the code that was written in the try block. Okay, so this is the idea. You still have to figure out when the problem is going to occur, but the idea is the piece of code that handles the error handling part is not mixed up with the code that is going to handle your common scenario, the normal mode of operation, right? And this try catch things, these try catch things, they can also be nested inside each other, right? So it is possible that you have a try catch pair within another try or within another catch. Okay, as long as these try and catch they appear contiguously, so there shouldn't be any more code uh, between the try and the catch blocks. Okay, they have to be contiguously placed. So as long as these try and catch blocks are placed contiguously, there can be any level of nesting. So this is a simple example. Assume that you are writing your application's logic here. Now you put a try block, whatever logic, whatever code it is there, it should have some probable issues as well. So probable issues means these are the cases, these are the exceptions that might occur when you run this code. And then right after this try, you put a catch. We will talk about these relevant types and everything in a minute. And then you handle this particular error. Okay, so this error might occur in the code that is there in this try block. Similarly, I have another try block. There is some application logic here. This logic does not have any problems. There is no way it can run into any kind of problem. But this logic can. So I create another try catch here and put whatever logic I want here, and then put a relevant catch here. And you can see that this catch is applicable to this try, and this catch is applicable to this try. Okay, the only thing that you have to make sure is that nothing is in between. So I cannot write a statement here, for example, or here, for example, or here. That will give you an error. But as long as these are contiguous, you have no issues. And you can have more than one catch statements as well for any given try. It's just that these catch blocks get associated with a particular try block. Okay, so to execute a piece of error handling, what you really need to do is you need to use the throw keyword. Okay, and what exactly is so the terminology that we use is something like this: you throw an exception which can be caught in a catch block. That is the idea, right? So so you say, please try to execute this code, and then you write the code. If an exception occurs, please throw it so that we can catch it in a different block. So conceptually, this is the idea. So these throw statements are placed inside the try block, and they are written usually written in this format: if, and then you check for an error condition. If the error condition is true, you throw something. What exactly is something, that I'll tell you. So this is a typical case of how exception handling code is written. So let us just walk through this. What happens? Let's say that I have a statement at the top, right? Let's call it statement I. So first, because the execution, happens like this sequentially. So statement I is executed first. Then the control enters the try block. Okay. Now statement J is executed straight away. Then this if condition is checked. Okay, if there is some condition, I have put some error condition here. Okay, if this condition is true, then there is a throw statement. Okay, and what do I write here after the throw statement? I basically it is similar to making a function call. So in one way you can say that this catch is more like, these catches are more like function calls. Okay, and these variables here are like the parameters for these function calls. So what really happens is, if I write throw and then I put a variable here which is, let us say, of type A. Okay, type A, right? So it could be int, char, float, double, or a class. It could be anything, right? So whenever you write throw and then you put a variable of a specific type, what happens is there is there is an attempt to match this exception with some catch block that you have provided here. So in this case, if the variable that you are throwing from here is that of type A, then this catch block, this one where the type is type A, where this particular catch block is executed, right? So this is what happens at this point of time. If the condition is true, the control transfers to the first catch block here, so this catch block. Okay, otherwise if this condition is false, the execution goes on normally. So then statement K is executed, right? That is what happens. By the way, if this condition was true, nothing below from here gets executed at all, right? So once you exit the try block, you are not going to re-enter the try block. Okay, so once an exception has been thrown from a try block, whatever code is written after that, that doesn't get executed. Okay, we can have hundreds of statements here, but they will not be executed. So what happens is, uh, if a catch is thrown, if an exception is thrown, then the control simply goes out of the try block and it doesn't return back there. Okay, so then what happens is, let us assume that this error condition was false. So then again statement K will be executed, the normal execution takes place. Then again this condition is checked. This time, if this condition is true, I'm going to throw the exception with the variable of type B. So now in this case, this catch gets activated, this the control gets transferred here. Okay, and again statement L is not executed. If both these error conditions were false, then statement L gets executed. And irrespective of what happened here, whether the try was executed, or whether the whole try block was executed, or some exception was thrown, um, at the end, when this exception handling has finished, or the normal mode of operation has finished, statement M gets executed. So is this flow understandable to everyone? Are there any queries related to this flow? Do you understand what exactly happened here? Any questions, any doubts in your mind? No? Is it clear what really happened here? So let me just revise everything. So the idea is something like this: you put conditions within a try block, and then you throw an exception if something exceptional has happened. Um, you can consider this thing to be a kind of a parameter for your throw, for your exception. So this variable, whatever is this variable, this usually contains the information related to handling this error. Okay, this is the idea, that whatever information is required to handle this error is present in this variable. It could be as simple as an integer which is having an error code, for example, with the help of which you can figure out what happened. Or it could be as complex as an object which contains a number of fields with the help of which you can figure out what to do with this error. But what really happens is the type of this variable, that is important, right? Why? Because there will be an attempt to match this type to the types of the catches that you have provided below. Another thing that you should know is that it is in some ways very similar to the switch case scenario, that only the first catch that matches the variable type is executed. It's not like any so it's like case with break statements, right? So whenever one catch gets executed, nothing below that is even tried out. Okay, so it is expected that you don't have to go below, right? So the matching starts from top and it goes up to bottom, and the moment you figure out one catch which has a matching type, that particular catch is executed, and then nothing else below that is executed. And then you simply jump to the statement right after these try catches, and the program continues. Any questions on this? No? Okay. So there are certainly some questions that anyhow arise after seeing this, right? So the first thing is, what if there is no matching catch, right? So I have the variable here, right? The variable that I'm throwing here. Let us say it is of a type which doesn't match any of the catches that I have given here. So then what happens, right? So then there is a routine called the terminate routine. Okay, this is a system routine. So system adds it to your executable. So the terminate routine gets called, which by the way, in usually, by default, it simply invokes another routine called abort, right? Which means that your program will terminate, right? It will not execute any further. So if you throw an exception for which there is really no catch, the in the nutshell your program will terminate. That is the idea. You can of course have something like this catch, and then you just don't provide any variable here, you just provide three ellipses. Okay, so this is very much like the default case in switch case, right? In switch case, if you have no matching case, what happens? Either the control will go out, or nothing will happen. Or if no other case matches, you can provide the default case, that which gets executed in case no other case has matched. So similarly, there is this, a generic catch which has these three ellipses. So here, if none of the catches were caught, then this particular catch gets executed. Another possibility that you should think about is, what if I write a throw? Because I told you that the throw should always be within a try. Only then can you throw something when you are trying something. So what if you put a throw that doesn't have any try? In that case, again the terminate method gets called. Okay, the terminate routine is called. And by the way, you can change the behavior of this terminate routine. So for example, instead of just aborting, you might say, I would like to put a message to the user that something exceptional has happened, or something like that, before exiting, or I would like to call it in some other way, whatever it is, right? So it is possible to provide your own code for this terminate handler. We are not going to look at it. It's kind of slightly complicated, but it is possible to do so. Okay, so if you guys have no queries, we can then move to some code. We can see how exception handling code actually looks like. If you have a question, we can first answer that, and then I guess there are no questions. Okay, so then, okay, some question. Only one. Only one. Any other question? Any other queries? Terminate. So the terminate part is something like this. The idea is, what happens if an exception has occurred, but that exception has no handler. Okay, there is an error which has occurred in your program, but there is really no way to handle this error, right? So then what should what should happen in the background, right? You don't know. So the default behavior is that there is a system method, there is a system routine called terminate. Okay, it's a function, it's a global function which gets called, right? If there is no matching handler for a particular error, this global function gets called. And by default, in most implementations, by default, all it simply does is it stops your program then and there. Okay, it terminates your program, right? Because it might be wrong to continue execution even though something exceptional has happened. So the default case, the default way of saying, I don't know how to deal with it, is basically get out, right? You say, I don't know how to deal with it, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm stopping everything right here, right? This is what we do with COVID, right? We lock down everything because we don't know how to stop the virus from infecting people, right? So when we don't have any other ways, the only thing that is left is simply lock people in their homes so that they cannot contract the virus. So similarly, when you have I have an exception for which there is no matching try, sorry, no matching catch, then the implementation has no real way to figure out what to do. So it simply terminates your program. That is the idea. But as I said, there is a way by which you can change this behavior. You can, for example, provide a different terminate handler. So in that terminate handler, you can write your own code. You can say, first put a cout saying that I have encountered this and I would like to exit, or please contact us to know more, whatever you want, right? I mean, you would have seen some applications, even when they crash, there's like a last message saying that this application has crashed, please report it to us, or something like this, and on this email. So this is the kind of thing that even when your system terminated, you still have like a graceful degradation. It's called graceful degradation, that even though it has degraded, it is going down, still, right before going down, it is still very humble and trying to tell you what to do. So that is the idea. If you want to do something like this, you can always provide a different piece of code for the terminate handler. But I did not include it here because uh, it is something of a stretch. Right now you might not require providing an explicit terminate handler. So that is why I didn't go into detail. Any other questions? Okay, so then let us see some code. By the way, from here onwards, this is how I will do it, because um, from next week onwards also, the topics that we are supposed to cover in C++, they are more practical, right? I mean, so instead of just lecture, I'll also have some piece of code that I would like to show you towards the end. So let me show it to you now. Hope you can see my VM. Uh, Let me show you this class. Okay, so now, in that same toy world that we've been living all this while, the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to have a toy validator. So whenever you're trying to create a new instance of a toy, there are some checks that you would like to make. That you know, there are just two checks right now that we are checking for. First is that this particular toy's name should not be blank. Okay, it should be something other than blank. And the second thing is that its price is not negative. These are the only two things we are going to check. Okay, so we have created a class here. This is called a toy validator class. It only has one field called message, one protected method called check, and two public methods. This is called create after validation, and this is called get message. So let me show you how these methods work. So this is the idea. What you really do is you want to create a toy instance, and in order to create that, you want to see that whatever inputs to the constructor that you are going to provide, are these inputs valid or not. This is the idea of the toy validator class, that it will check whether the arguments that you are going to pass to the constructor of a toy, are they valid or not. If they are valid, this method will create a new toy object for you and return a pointer to it. Otherwise, it will return a null. A null means that there is something wrong. It did not work as expected. And if the returned value is null, you would like to see what went wrong. Okay. So in order to do that, you can call this method on the toy validator called get message. So it will return you a message, an error message, that this is the problem. This is why it did not work. I was not able to create a toy instance for you. So to check the actual problem, you call this message. Let me first show you how this is being used, and then we will come back to this particular example. In the main, this is how I use it. I create a toy validator. Okay, and here what am I doing? I'm trying to create a new instance of toy. This is a toy pointer. This toy ptr is basically a toy pointer. I call this method v dot create after validation, and I'm passing it some values here, right? In fact, let me start by giving it correct values. What happens? This validation should figure out that this is relevant. My the name of the toy is not blank. It is not blank, and the price that I am putting is not negative. So both the checks are fine. So here what will happen is this validation will go through, and you will have a new toy. So let me just show it to you. So it says a new toy created successfully, creating a new blocks with ID 1. Now let me make a change. Let me make this as blank. So what does it say? Could not create a new toy. Reason, name cannot be empty. So where did this come from? Where did this message come from? Let us see. So what I'm doing it is I'm doing this toy creation part inside a try block. Okay, and I'm checking here that after this function has returned, is the value of toy ptr null or not null? If it is null, I'm basically throwing something, right? I'm throwing a value. And what exactly is this value? This value is v. What is v? This toy validator object, right? And then I have a matching catch block here. Okay, what does this catch? The type of v here is toy validator. So as soon as I throw this from here, these two statements are not going to be executed now, right? I mean, the try block simply ends then and there as soon as a throw is encountered, and then a search process starts. You know what? Where do we have a matching catch? So here is the matching catch. Okay, within this catch, I'm just printing could not create a new toy. Reason this, and you can also probably see it is this. This is the reason price cannot be negative. So what we really did here is we checked for an exceptional condition, and then we threw a particular error in case the condition is met. And what happens? It is the catch block that gets executed. If this part is clear, let me then we'll move to the next part. Any questions till this, right? So just for now, just forget whatever is there in the create after validation function. The only thing you know is that in this function, a null is returned if there is some problem, and if there is no problem, a pointer to a newly created toy object is returned. So for now, just look at in a black boxed fashion. So do you have any questions regarding this? Let me open up the uh, any questions on this? Any doubts? Anything that you would like to ask? Yeah, I mean illegal exception. So basically, there is a okay. Let me I'll get back to your question. Let us let others ask first. Are there any more questions related to this? Especially the overall flow. This is what I'm currently trying to see, right? I mean, do you understand the overall flow? Okay, I am assuming it is clear. So okay, so this is the idea, guys. So illegal exception, I think you are probably coming from Java background or something like that. So yeah, in Java and other languages as well, exception handling is people worked on exception handling in a much better fashion. So yes, in Java, the exception handling is much better, I would say, and much more vast. But the idea is exactly the same in C++ as well, that whenever there is some exceptional condition, the exceptional condition might happen when you so you can actually check for these exceptional conditions on your own. So you say something like, if something has happened through this, or it might occur as part of regular execution as well. So for example, there are certain types of exceptions which are thrown by the C++ library itself. One example, if I remember, is that of dynamic memory allocation. When dynamic memory allocation fails, an exception is thrown, and so if you put the new delete, the statements which are allocating memory using new delete, if you put them within a try block and then you put a certain exception in the catch, you can figure it out, right? The catch part is executed. But the C++ exception handling is actually not that elegant. Okay, Java's exception handling, for instance, is far more elegant. It's a later language also, right? So people who came up with Java, see, for example, the people who came up with C++, they knew the issues with C, so they improved upon C. And the people who came up with Java, they knew the issues associated with C++, so in certain aspect they improved upon those, right? And one of the aspects is exception handling. So Java's exception handling is actually much better and much vast. But yeah, the concepts are exactly the same, that you create a try block, you put whatever code uh, uh, is prone to any kind of error or any kind of exception within the try block, and then you put a catch block, one or more catch blocks, so that you can catch those specific situations and process them accordingly. So if you really see, we are not really doing anything that is out of the world, right? I mean, I could have, for instance, the this message that I created, that I've written here, this cout message, I could have written this message directly here also, right? I mean, instead of throw v, I could have written this message directly, right? But this is the idea, that what we are trying to do is, when we and this matters when you are reading code that is extremely dense, right? I mean, you are inside, let us say, 3 levels of blocks, and at that point of time, you want to only write the normal operation related stuff, and you just want to leave the error handling part to, let us say, a catch block. Okay, so you are segregating the error handling part from the normal operation part, so that it is easier on the eye. When you read this code, it becomes easier. You don't read the catch blocks unless something really has happened. I mean, otherwise, if you're reading code and you want to that error handling code will become annoying for you, because you wouldn't know that this code is actually error handling code. But the moment you see a throw, it means that there was some error and it must have been caught somewhere. So I'll read it later, but let us assume that everything is fine and go ahead. That is in some ways the idea. So is this part clear? I have one more thing to show you. So if this part is clear, we can go ahead. Okay, so just one more thing, that one more concept that I would like to show you. So the way I actually did these validations is something like this. I created a function called check. Okay, this is a protected function. Why is it a protected function? That you'll come to know if you check the homework. By the way, I've forgotten to put the slides and for Monday, and I think Monday and Tuesday both. So sorry for that. I'll put the slides straight away after today's lectures. I'll put all the 3 slides. So yeah, so in the homework you'll see that there is something for which it would be better if this check function was protected. So that is why I have made it protected. But anyhow, so what is it that the check function is doing? As soon as you call this create after validation function, this too uses a try catch. Okay, within the try catch, what is it doing is something like this. It simply calls the check method, and after that it creates a new toy. Now you can see that here there is really no throw, um no no throw statement at all, right? If you just see this part of the code, there is no throw statement. So you might feel that okay, this catch is useless, right? I mean, it will never enter here. But this is where the beauty of exception handling comes in. What I'm really doing is this: within this check function, I'm writing throw statements, but there are no tries here, right? So if you go back to what I just told you, is that without a try, if you try to put a throw, there will be it will be considered a case where terminate should be called, but that is not going to happen here. Why? Because this throw thing, right? These exceptions can go beyond the boundaries of a particular method. Okay, so if an exception was thrown in the method check, and there was no catch here, what happens is the control goes back to the calling function. It basically returns back at this point, and then the same process starts from here onwards. It will start if there are any catches which are matching this try. If there was no try here, it would have gone to the next level. So basically the exception would have been delegated to the main function, and then the try catches that we have written in the main function, there it would have tried to match some catch. So this is like a cascading process. So wherever you throw an exception, the first thing that happens is it is tried to be matched to a enclosing try. If there is no enclosing try, you go out of this method to the calling method. Then you check if this particular statement is within a try catch block, within a try block. If it is, then the catches for this block will be tried out. If not, then again you will go up, so on and so forth. Right? So this whole thing is cascading in nature, and this is why many a times so now all you have to do is, let us say, a typical kind of error can happen at 5 different places. So what you can do is you can write a try block, call 5 different methods, and there you don't have to write try catch. You just write throw statements everywhere there is an exception, and then any throw that you do will come back in the calling function, and it will be handled here. Of course, there is a catch here, that wherever this so for instance, if this particular catch works, if this particular exception gets thrown, then what happens is, at any point of time, at here, this particular statement is not executed. Okay, so this is the catch. So, and we are using this property here. Okay, so this is what is happening here, that if this particular exception is thrown, we will this particular the statement right next to it will not be executed. So we are making use of this is a kind of a trick, that if the exception was thrown, we'll simply come here. If it is not thrown, we'll stay here. Okay, so this temp equal to new toy 2 will only be executed when the exception is not thrown. So that is the advantage we are taking here. Is it clear, like what is the way to do this? Any questions? Sorry, I had to check up a message. So this part is so now you can understand why this exception handling can be, if you want to use it in a if you want to use it wisely, this is something that is very useful, right? You write a whole lot of stuff and then you only catch it at one particular point. That is the idea, right? Because it can go beyond the boundaries of a particular function. That is the idea, right? uh, the only problem is if it keeps on going up and up and up in the call hierarchy. Let us say it reaches main and there is no matching catch for it in even in the main. Then there is a problem, then the terminate method is called. But other than that, it will try its best to find some matching clause, by keep on jumping through your function call trace. That is the idea. Okay, any queries? Okay, then. So yeah, so this is it from for today. Exception handling is a very important concept. It's not just in C++, but in most of the modern languages. You have the same concept. There will be a try block and there will be catch blocks. So this thing, if you learn it once, the only thing that will differ is slight syntax differences, but the concepts are exactly the same in other languages as well. So so it is actually good for you to learn the whole concept of exception handling. Okay, any queries, or otherwise we can break? Okay, then. Okay, guys. So bye, and please keep on working on your projects. Some of you, I'm basically expecting that you guys will be able to come up with your set of requirements by the next weekend. Okay. So I'll tell you how to send those requirements. Don't send it to me directly on email for now. I'll tell you how to do that. But please assume that during the next weekend, I'm expecting you guys to be able to finalize all the requirements for your project, whatever is the project. Okay, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
sir, I had a question regarding the set of requirements. What should
Mhm.
we include in those?
The
Like,
re the See, okay, the requirements basically is it's like this. The only thing that I'm going to check at the end are, you know whether your design matches your requirements. Even if you have not written code for some of the requirements, that is fine. You can say that I needed to create 50 classes, but I only created 10. That is fine with me. Okay, but if your requirements are such that you required 50 classes, it should show in your design. Your design should be such that if I give you, let us say, 3 more months or 4 more months, or 3 more years, you should be able to complete the project. That is the idea, right? So come up with your requirements, whatever project you have picked up. As I said, if you are a 3 or 4 member team, take turns to become the user of that project, and then the others are the developers. Okay, so you are querying the user, what do you expect from this project, what do you expect from this solution, and the user tells you something, I expect this, I expect this, I expect this. And then you take turns, okay, and then collate everything and come up with, let us say, a bulleted set of points. Okay, so requirement 1.1. So for example, certain people have library management system as project. So requirement 1.1, we should maintain a repository of books. Okay. Requirement 1.1a, the information about books that we should have include name, accession number, the year it was published, and the authors. Requirement 1.1b is what we'll use a MySQL database, or we'll use a flat file to store it. Now, similarly, requirement 1.2, you should have an interface to search for books. And then 1.2a, books could be searched either by name or by year or by author. 1.2b, the search results should be sorted by the year published, something like this, right? So you basically come up with your requirements in a set of bulleted points, and you should meet at least 3 or 4 times. Let us you should have, let us say, a half an hour meetings on 3 4 days, where one person becomes the user, the others become the developers, and then you try to note down what exactly is it. And at that point of time, when you are the user, just forget that you know computer science. Talk as if you are an idiot. I'm being very honest. Talk as if you are an idiot. Okay, because in general, when you are going to the industry and build projects, you should not have any assumption from your user. Your user might not have any background in computer science. Okay, and there is a saying also that I read somewhere. Software engineering today is a tussle between building bigger and better idiot proof systems, and the nature producing bigger and better idiots. And so far the nature is winning. Okay, so this is the idea that you should assume that your user does not have any knowledge about computer science, and then ask the user what exactly does he or she expect from the project, and then note it down and collate them. Okay, make it, as I said, a bulleted set of points. So there is a major requirement, and then there might be minor details of that requirement. So requirement is 1.1 or something like this, and then you say 1.1a, 1.1b, something like this. Is it clear?
Yes, sir, understood.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, bye.